distance between us. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to the May 25th regular meeting of Council. I'd like to first recognize that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk tonight will be Ms. Karen Robertson. Tonight's regular meeting of Council will be held in accordance with the Community Charter, Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272, and Ministerial Order number M083. Therefore, members of the public are required to observe meetings virtually and not attend in person. Delegation requests for unrelated council matters will not be permitted under this order and throughout the duration of the pandemic. Delegation requests related to agenda matters, such as a developer that would like to speak to his or her DP application, or a member of the public to speak to an item on the agenda, will be allowable as physical distancing requirements could be maintained. So those of you who are gathered here tonight to speak to an item on the agenda, welcome. Question period will be suspended for this meeting. Council will attend via Zoom or in person at these regular meetings, maintaining physical distancing at all times, which is easy to observe we are tonight. Members of staff that are partaking in the meeting will be spread out in the auditorium and the marked seating or outside in the lobby area. Please note there are yellow ticks around the Shaw Auditorium indicating where you can sit. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Robertson.
Thank you, Your Worship. We have three this evening. The first is an email from the Liquor Control and Regulation Branch and Policy Directive, which was received on May 22nd, and it's regarding temporary expanded service area authorization, and that is to be considered in conjunction with agenda item 8H, which is the COVID-19 response to downtown restaurant patios. The second item is a presentation and report on short-term solutions for cleanliness in public spaces, and this item was referred from the special meeting today at 2:30 p.m., and that would be considered under other business item 12A. And the second and last is the consideration of a motion, which is that city staff work with the Old City Quarter Association to develop a framework and funding strategy for restoring security in the Old City Quarter and refer back to council for decision. And this motion was referred from the special council meeting held earlier today, and this is also to be considered under other business item 12B.
Thank you very much. I'd ask for a motion now for approval of the agenda as amended.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Martman, seconded Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Motion for the adoption of the minutes is circulated. Moved Councillor Brown, seconded Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you very much. For the Mayor's report, given the length of the meeting, I'll try and be brief. Earlier, it was announced that the city is reopening select outdoor recreation facilities. That takes a great deal of careful planning, preparation, and consultation with health professionals and professional associations. Select outdoor recreation facilities were opened on Thursday, May 14th, and these included tennis courts, singles play only unless playing with people from the same household, pickleball courts, singles play only unless playing with the people from the same household, gated dog off-leash parks, and the bike park, the Steve Smith Park, and pump track at Bevan Park. And obviously the same guidelines continue to apply. You must adhere to physical distancing, 2 meters or 6 feet, wash your hands properly before coming to the park and after leaving, avoid the area if you're sick or have been exposed to someone who has been sick, not share equipment, food, water bottles, or other personal items, and not congregate in groups larger than 50. As some of you probably keenly appreciate, it is much easier to shut down a facility than it is to reopen it, taking into account all the requirements that COVID has imposed on us. I'm happy to say that Going Green is driving the city to silver with the new vehicle fleet strategy. On May the 11th, the Nanaimo City Council adopted a new green fleet strategy that includes efficiency targets outlined by E3 Fleet, a unique Canadian program that helps fleet owners continually improve their energy and environmental performance. And in February 2020, the city was awarded a Silver E3 Fleet Award for its current achievements in driving towards environmental responsibility. So that is very positive news for the city. It's property tax time, and the city is happy to provide multiple options to enable people to pay their property taxes. Obviously, you're encouraged to check your mailboxes and email accounts for receipt of your property tax notice that were sent out on Friday. City buildings such as the Service and Resource Centre behind City Hall may be closed to the public, but the city remains open for business, accepting Property tax payments. Property owners can use one of the following methods: through financial institutions, online, telephone, or in-person banking, dropping off a check payment in the box located outside in the Service and Resource Centre, or by mailing a check payment using the postage paid return envelope included in the tax notice package. And if a resident cannot access these payment methods or needs assistance, a pop-up tax payment office is open Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. in Bevan Park at the Frank Crane Arena box office. Residents who choose to come in person are advised that due to COVID-19 safety protocols, only debit and checks will be accepted as payment. A reminder that although property taxes are due on or before July 2nd, 2020, this year, and those who have financial ability to pay are indeed encouraged to pay their property taxes by the due date. In order, however, to ease some of the pressure on those who are financially impacted by the pandemic, the penalty for late payments has been extended to October 1st, 2020. So if you can't afford to pay, you have until October 20th to simply pay your property taxes without having to incur a penalty. And again, remind everyone, please don't forget to claim your homeowner or seniors or disability grant if you are eligible. Are we in a position to play our first-rate video prepared by staff? It's a brilliant bit of work.
COVID-19 has definitely brought about some unexpected changes. Grocery store lineups look different, offices operate behind closed doors, and there's more distance between us than ever before. And now, it's property tax time. Here are a few things that you may need to know. There are quite a few ways to pay your property taxes, and most of them are the same as last year. Through your financial institution, you can pay in person, online, or even by phone. However you choose to pay, you'll need your unique folio number that you can find on your property tax notice. You can also take your check to the drop box at the Service and Resource Centre at 411 Dunsmuir Street. The doors are closed, but we are open for business. Or perhaps, even easier, there's also a postage-paid envelope included with your property tax notice. Put the payment in the envelope and take it to a mailbox near you. These are all great ways to pay your taxes, but if you prefer to make an in-person payment, we're making that possible for you too. Typically, the City of Nanaimo Service and Resource Centre would be open, but to help maintain physical distancing, we'll be using an outdoor pop-up location instead. At the Bevan pop-up, there will be ambassadors on hand to help with directions, to help coordinate the lineup, and to keep the payment areas sanitized. Hi, Gary.
Oh, hi, Gracie. Please step up.
By now, it pretty much goes without saying, but if you feel at all sick, please stay home. This is an area of wellness. To help maintain safe distancing, only one person per household will be allowed to line up. Each spot in the lineup will have a physically distant 6 feet, and an ambassador will direct everyone when it's time to step up to the payment window. With respect to COVID-19 and some of the hardship it's brought, the City is extending the first penalty date for late property taxes to October 1st, so pay by September 30th to avoid a penalty. The actual due date for your payment is still July 2nd. Property taxes are the most significant funding source for the City, and from streetlights to park maintenance to bylaw enforcement, these funds help keep our city functioning.
Okay, thanks for waiting. Please step up to the window.
Thank you. If your home is your primary residence, don't forget to apply for your homeowner grant before the July 2nd deadline. You can do this online at www.nanaimo.ca/go-to/HOG, or the paperwork can be filled out and dropped off, mailed in, or processed in person with your tax payment. And if you are looking for more information on the province's tax deferment program, visit www.nanaimo.ca/go-to/tax deferment. That's it for now. For more information, call 250-755-4415 or visit www.nanaimo.ca.
And thanks to city staff and thanks to our new star, Gracie Hills, who performed so brilliantly, was supported by a cast of other city staff. The finance folks, wonderfully done. And finally this, June 1st to 7th marks British Columbia's Child and Youth in Care Week. The minister has invited the council and everyone to join the community in celebrating the strength, creativity, resilience, and tenacity of young people who are or have been in care. As some of you may know, it was our own Vancouver Island University that sponsored the program, that led the way in creating a free tuition program for children who had been in care in this province, thus inspiring the new government not long after it was elected to extend that program province-wide, giving a rare opportunity to many young people who had been raised in the most difficult of circumstances to pursue education, which is still the great equalizer in our society. And finally, I can't have a mayor's report without some comment about COVID. And as mayor, you get a lot of interesting suggestions from people and things you don't think about. Many of us have hearts in our windows at home. On our street, we don't bang pots, but most people have hearts in their windows saying thank you to healthcare workers. But two individuals, one a trucker who gets up at 2:30 a.m. and is putting in 14-hour days, delivering the very goods that all of us seem to require to live in our communities, and another individual who has serious health issues, has indicated to me that perhaps people could lower the volume just a little bit as they're expressing their thanks to healthcare workers. Because as he said, he needs his sleep, and he said it very plaintively. He's very supportive of what's being done, and the other individual who has serious health issues simply isn't getting the rest he needs. So it's an interesting perspective, and it brings us back to the concept of community. When we're doing good things, even sometimes with the best of intentions, we may have a negative impact on others. So I leave it out there, as I promised these individuals I would, with the community decide what they think is reasonable, but it brings an interesting perspective to all of us who are celebrating the good work of so many people in this community who have continued to deliver services to all of us, ensure we have access to groceries and gasoline and every other service, except for haircuts, which is starting this week, thank God, and for which all of us will be immensely grateful, some more so than others. Not Councillor Brown in a fit of generous conversation has pointed out that it's not as big a challenge as for some as it is for others. And again, just the community in general, as we start to loosen up through COVID now with directions from the province. A big thank you to everyone in this community who's worked so hard to get us through what has been a difficult time. I know that tensions can be high. Certainly some of the correspondence we've received as council on various issues has perhaps been a bit more vociferous than usual as people have time on their hands, but that is the nature of community. But British Columbia has done an outstanding job, and Vancouver Island in particular. You should all give yourselves a pat on the back. I would now ask for a motion for adoption of consent items. Moved, Councillor Hemmond, seconded Councillor Martman. All those in favour? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Ms. Ligon, 2019 financial statements.
Thank you, Your Worship. Council. We are going to have a presentation this evening from Liette Bates-Emer, partner at KPMG, and she'll be joined by Sarah Burden, Senior Manager with KPMG. KPMG are our auditors. It'll be a brief PowerPoint presentation on the 2019 financial statements, and we are looking to have the statements presented to you for acceptance. And we will be available after the presentation to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. If we can.
Hi there. I can't tell if you've got our presentation up, so.
A small technical difficulty here.
Presentation is up.
Thank you.
Okay. You ready for me now?
Please proceed. Thanks very much.
Okay. I'll maybe just ask when I'm ready to flip the page. Oh no, I can see it now. Yay. Okay, thank you. So in terms, the first page there, audit status. Let me flip forward. Thank you. So in terms of our audit status, we have completed our audit for the year end December 31st, 2019, with the exception of having the discussion with Council tonight and then Council approving the financial statements. Once that is complete, we are ready to sign our opinion, which is a clean audit opinion that the financial statements present fairly in accordance with public sector accounting standards. I'd like to report that we received full cooperation from management throughout our audit this year. If you want to go to the next one, yes. The audit focus areas, there was one area of risk that remained in our audit as required by professional standards, which was the risk of management override. We have addressed this risk with our standard procedures, including testing of journal entries and looking at estimates, and we're satisfied that this risk has been addressed. The other areas of focus in our audit included tangible capital assets, cash and investments, revenues and receivables, salaries and benefits, expenses and payables, and addressing the impact of COVID-19. There were no significant issues as a result of our work on these areas of the audit. Included in the financial statements is disclosure around the subsequent event of COVID-19. We did identify one correction to the financial statements, which was corrected by management to remove $896,000 from revenue and put that in deferred revenue, as the amounts will be brought into revenue in the future, not all in the current year. So this decreased the annual surplus by $896,000. There were no uncorrected adjustments identified. And I can report that we did not identify any significant deficiencies in internal controls.
Thank you very much. Any questions from Council? Councillor Thorpe. In the modern world, I have to ask you to approach the mic.
Hurry down from the nosebleed section. Thank you very much, Your Worship, through you to the auditors. And I think, and I hope I know the answer to this question. It's a very basic one, but I think it should be asked, and it should be asked publicly. And the question is very simply this to the auditors: did you find any area of concern or any issue with how the city conducts its financial accounting practices? Is there anything Council needs to be aware of?
No.
That's what I was hoping for. Thank you very much.
Sometimes the negative is the positive. Any other questions? If not, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Recommendation, the motion, Councillor Martman.
Thank you. Motion that Council approve the 2019 annual financial statements for the City of Nanaimo.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Worship. It was just a question, and this is probably for staff, not the auditors. That's why I didn't ask the question before. It's under the statement of operations on my report. It's on page 5. It refers to an annual surplus of $40 million and change. Can you describe me to what that encompasses? What's in that $40 million? And because we always get the note our surplus is, $7 million or $2.5 million, that sort of thing.
You've preempted my little blurb on that, because that was something I was going to point out to Council, is that the way we budget and the way we're required under PSAB to present our financial statements are there's two different rules. So we have to present a balanced budget, which includes things, transfers to and from reserve and those kind of things. Whereas in PSAB for our financial statements, we don't include those. So transfers to and from reserves are not included in our financial statements. So that is the biggest difference between the surplus number of about $7 million we gave you back in March and the financial statement showing 40 million. That's the biggest difference. Is
So-
that there's some things that per accounting rules you don't include in your financial statements, but from a budget perspective, we have to. And so from my understanding is that PSAB is looking at coming out with a new format for their statement of operations that kind of reconciles those a little bit better than they do right now, because they don't.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Mercer, anything else you'd like to?
No, just this
Comment
year,
on tonight?
as normal, we have to have, under normal rules, we have to have them passed by May 15th, but because of COVID, it has, like everything else, has changed the date, so we don't have to have them approved but till the end of August, but the audit was done and staff had done their work, so here we are, looking for approval.
Let's make hay while the sun shines. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is item 8B, Development Variance Permit Application Number DVP 403-1226 Lawler Road. Mr. Lindsay, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you mentioned, the next item on the agenda is for a development variance permit. As indicated, the property is on Lawler Road, Your Worship. This is a historic mobile home park that's actually existed from pre-amalgamation. So it's been a property that the city's had to deal with and essentially inherited many years ago, and have been dealing with some of the non-conforming issues in those parks, in this park for a number of years. In this specific case, we have the siting of a new unit, which wants to proceed, but unfortunately the spacing of the neighboring unit requires it actually to be moved over on the site so they maintain their required spatial separation. In order to do that, it requires a variance to the front yard, and as such, we're here this evening to seek council support for that variance.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Lindsay? Mr. Colton, Keith Colton? Please, just if for the record, you could introduce yourself and state your address and come to the mic, please.
Yes, my name's Keith Colton, and I'm here as a delegate for the variance at 1226 Lawler Road. I have some site plans here, if anybody would like one. Charlene, would you like one? No? Okay. Anybody want a site plan as I just go over it?
Council have all had a chance to read the material, Mr. Colton.
It's pretty straightforward, the last gentleman said, but where it is, the mobile sitting now is not in compliance, and it has to be moved 5.10 feet to the front, which then does give it a variance of 3.2 on the right side and 4.4 meters on the left.
I can't predict how council will vote, Mr. Colton, but I suspect the lack of questions may indicate that you've probably made as good a submission with the assistance of Mr. Lindsay. Councillor Martin.
No question, but I'll move the motion.
Seconded. Any discussion? Yes, yes, thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to this? Looks like you've got neighbors and friends, no enemies.
Thank you.
Seeing no one else, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is item C, Development Variance Permit Application Number DVP 402-236 Halliburton Street. Mr. Lindsay again.
Thank you, Worship. And another development variance permit application, this one on the corner of Farquhar and Halliburton Street. In this case, there's actually a request because the property zone does have a commercial zoning on it. And under that zone, it requires that buildings actually be built closer to the road. And again, it's anticipating a commercial development. In this case, the applicant's proposing to construct a single-family home and is wishing for a number of reasons to actually push that housing unit back further on the property, closer to the lane in the rear. And as such is allowing for an increase, is requesting an increase from the minimum front yard setback from 7.5 meters to 15 meters to facilitate this single-family home.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Any questions? I took occasion to drive down and have a look. Nice to see improvement in the south end. Councillor Hemmons, of course. Anyone care to make the, is there anyone here wishing to speak to DVP 402? Again, anyone wishing to speak to this application? Seeing none. Councillor Martman.
Motion that council issue development variance permit number DVP 402-236 Halliburton Street
With the following,
with the following variance: increase maximum allowable front yard setback from 7.5 meters to 15 meters for a proposed single residential dwelling.
seconded Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is nuisance property abatement number 62170 Spencer Road. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. As Council is aware, we have a long-standing nuisance abatement and cost recovery bylaw that allows us to designate properties as nuisance properties within the city and allows for cost recovery for the additional resources that are expended on those properties. In this case, we have a property that's been identified by both bylaw services and the RCMP for recommendation of receiving a nuisance designation. That property is at Unit 6, 2170 Spencer Road. Your Worship, as outlined in the report, both the RCMP is supportive of and recommending this designation, as they have had 12 calls to this property since January.
Councillor Martman.
I'll move the motion.
Seconded Councillor Armstrong. We've all had a chance to read the material. Any discussion or questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is item E, covenant amendment application number CA11-6340 McRobb Avenue. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a project I think Council is familiar with just because we've been in front of you a number of times recently. This is one just before COVID where we were in front of Council asking it be referred to a public hearing, and then because of the restrictions put on through the pandemic, Council decided to proceed with an alternative process for receiving input. So that we've gone through that process, solicited input from the neighbors, and just to reconfirm for anybody watching at home, anything that's been submitted has now been distributed to Council. So they've received all of the input over the last 2 weeks, and as of noon today, there was no further input or submissions received. So Council has all of the submissions included and distributed in front of them. Your Worship, this is a covenant amendment, as you mentioned, for two things in principle. One is to allow for a 6-story multifamily on the eastern portion of the subject property, and also to clarify how the community contributions that were just secured a number of years ago are going to be distributed between the first and second phase of the development. The concept plan is on Schedule C of your report, and Attachment D has the aerial. Certainly happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Questions for Mr. Lindsay? Councillor Armstrong.
Yep. With many of the emails I received, they were concerned about shadowing. Was there a shadowing study done?
Your Worship, I should have mentioned this in the introduction. This is simply the covenant amendment at this point. There's a development permit application that has been received, and it's currently being evaluated by staff. So that will likely come forward to Council. And I'm looking at Mr. Holm. I'm not sure if through that DP application, if he's aware if there's a shadow study, but it's certainly something we could consider as part of the development permit. So we'll have to follow up with Council when we bring back the development permit application.
Thank you.
And just to be clear, Councillor Armstrong, shadow permitted in respect of the 6-story or the 2 20-story towers that are proposed, that are part already zoned for, okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I also received a number of the emails, and Mr. Lindsay, you can correct me, but the gist that I got from the emails was that there is some discomfort with the transition from townhouses to a 6-story building, but that the real discomfort is those two 20-story towers. And so I would agree with Councillor Armstrong that if a shadow study is being done, then it would need to incorporate, I guess I'm saying the community objections to this, I believe, are more related to the two towers. And so ensuring that when that comes forward, we have that.
Your worship, if that's sorry, I misunderstood the question, if that was the question, if it's about the towers, because the towers were rezoned early 2000s, I believe. So that property was rezoned and went through that process. So through that, there will definitely be shadow studies that were done for the towers at that time. But at this point, the applicants are proceeding with just the phase 1, which is the 6-story building. They've indicated they have interest in proceeding with what there is the right to do under zoning and the covenant for the 2 towers, but that's a future phase 2. But certainly, if council's interested, we could distribute those shadow studies for the towers that were completed.
If I may, just one other follow-up, and that's that a couple of the people mentioned that notification for the public hearing and input really went 10 meters in front of where the proposed development is. And I do, for a development that does have height to it, I think it would be best, we'd get more input if we went a little broader than 10 meters.
Your worship, that's following with council's procedures and notification bylaw that generally the idea is to hit adjacent properties and properties on the other side of the street. But I would note that in addition to those are the hand-delivered and mail deliveries, we do require signage on the properties, and we do require posting in newspapers. If that's something that council wanted to consider, then I think a review of the procedures and notification bylaw may be in order.
Food for thought, Councillor Hemmons. Thank you. Councillor Martin.
So just for clarification, my understanding, this is simply a covenant in regards to not building townhouses, but building the 6 units. The 2 towers have already been pre-approved, zoned, and everything is just waiting for a time for them to build. But that's already a done deal, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
The original proposal was for 2 towers on this property, and what I would describe as the remainder of the property being allocated to surface parking. That was really the model and the design that was proposed 20 years ago, I think, when the first proposal came forward. That followed up with a subsequent proposal a number of years later that looked at putting some townhomes on what we're calling the eastern portion of the property. And now they're looking at actually going underground parking, more of an urban development that we'd want to see in that area, and actually replacing the townhomes with 6-story
So were we already
development. But back to your main point, the towers were previously approved, have zoning in place, comply with the covenant. They could proceed with development permit, building permit.
So we would be building a little bit of density where there already is density with the buildings surrounding it?
Absolutely. It's an infill property if you're describing it that way, and one that's designated for higher density under the official community plan, yes.
Right. And then as for the change in the public hearing, processes, and we had decided to move this forward, but with the opportunity for people that might not be able to appear as a delegation, that we're beginning to open up now, but there was ample time given for, and we have received quite a few of written submissions. So I think we still tried to follow process as much as possible in COVID times. So, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Brown, cut it off. All right, Councillor Armstrong.
Mine's going now to Centennial. That is a one lane, like one vehicle can only go down at this particular time. Is that new development going to be accessing that, which is a private road? And if so, is there any movement to extend it from single lane?
Maybe I can ask that attachment C.
It's D is the one I'm looking at.
C or D?
D is the one I have.
You're looking at D?
Yeah.
Attachment D, Derek? So while Derek's pulling that up, I can say there's an internal roadway sentinel, which is actually a private road.
Yeah.
that is shared amongst the stratas there. So they all have joint access and responsibility for maintenance of that road. So there'll be access to all of these properties to that. This property, although, will have close proximity to Calinda. So the majority of the traffic we would expect to come out and access for a very short period that internal private road and then out onto Calinda, but they would have the right as owners in that overall strata development to go out through any part of that private roadway.
So then they would, if I may, Your Worship, so then they would have to pay for the road maintenance out of their strata, is that correct?
There is already an agreement between all the property owners that have a portion of that road. Thank you, Derek. So Sentinel passes over a portion of all those properties, so it's reciprocal agreements between all of these properties that was registered a number of years ago, and in that there would be a cost-sharing agreement and responsibility for who pays to maintain that private road system. So if I was mentioning before we pulled it up, so the area in question is outlined in yellow, of course, and then right below that is the public road, which is Calinda. So the primary and most direct access to a public road would be off of that connection between Sentinel and Calinda directly onto the public road.
Yeah, I guess just one of my other concerns is that the road coming on to Calinda now, sometimes you can't even pass it because people from the seniors facility are parking there, or visitors from the other, because there's lack of parking in that area. So that would be another concern I would have with an additional 6-story building going in, that those roads really aren't built for that amount of traffic.
And Your Worship, I would note that it might be hard to see on the air photo, but you can certainly see what Councillor Armstrong is speaking to is the concentration of on-street parking along Calinda. And then I would note, though, as you move, if you move further west, the rest of Calinda, I believe, does not meet current city standards at that point, so it would be upgraded as part of the future development.
It's actually the piece between Sentinel and Calinda. See that you've got the vehicles parked there? Now, if you go there, they're also parked on the other side, so it's almost impossible to even drive a car through. That's just, so maybe something as simple as a no parking on one side. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I didn't really have a question before, but something that Mr. Lindsay mentioned. With the taking out of this piece of the property and putting in the townhouses, putting in the 6-story building, is there enough space left on the rest of the property to build 2 towers and provide the parking?
Yes, they have a conceptual design they've completed that's demonstrated they could continue with that phase 2 and still meet the density under the existing zone and meet the parking requirements, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone wishing to speak to Covenant Amendment Application Number CA11, that which is before Council now? I see 2 gentlemen. If either of you wish to speak to it, please come forward to the mic, introduce yourself, and give us your address.
My name is Ken Shimizu. I live at 6310 McCrow. First of all, I'd like Your Worship ask if this is a review of the covenant, does that mean that you can open other aspects of the covenant, like density, that was approved before? If not, it's pointless for me to speak about density.
The short answer is the covenant could only be opened by the agreement of both parties, and in our particular case, it's the owner of the property is applying to amend the covenant, and it has to be approved by council. Am I correct, Mr. Lindsay? Excuse me, we have to do the little dance with the mic here.
Sorry, in general, there's no ability to vary density. However, if in a covenant, for example, there was the zoning allowed for 100 units, say, for example, and a covenant said they were going to be restricted to 60, that a previous agreement between a council and the developer said we're going to limit it to 60, at any point, a person could make application to that covenant and apply to amend it, as long as that density was remaining within whatever the zoning allows. So I think the key point, I think, Your Worship, is what you identified, is that it's a contract between 2 parties, which is at the agreement of both parties can be amended. Council has a policy for how that amendment goes about and how we make sure that the public is given opportunity to provide input. But any of these covenants essentially have the ability to be amended over time, yes.
Thank you. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Well, if when this application appeared on my doorway a week ago and in the mail, but I was looking at the 66-unit development on that one piece of property. I guess my question also would be, does the developer want you to look at that as a standalone unit, or is it part of phase one of a larger development? And if it is part of a larger development, council then has to look at the overall density and how does the 66 unit affect the density on phase two. In other words, certainly if it's a standalone and I'm the developer and I go from 8 to 66 units, I would be struck the mother load. And you have to make a look at the overall development in terms of how it fits into the overall density. That was one question. I know in the roadway, there is an agreement, but it is based on the original concept for this project, which was somewhere around 250 units or something. And that was the agreement on how the roadway was used. Now they're almost doubling the density, which increases the amount of traffic that they're using and the number of cars, of course, that they would have. And the cost sharing would be much different than what is originally agreed to. And I don't know how we or the different stratas can reassess that unless it's part of again, that was a legal agreement, so it's probably part of a covenant that is attached to the title of the land.
I would think that the terms of your overall strat agreement would provide for an assignment or apportioning of the costs amongst the units based on square footage, etc. In other words, that you can't have 8 townhouses expected to pay amount equal to 100 strata units in a tower. I could be wrong, but I'm looking at Mr. Lindsay, and perhaps he can answer the first part of this question.
Sorry, Worship. I was given a microphone, but I feel like Phil Donahue if I stand over to the side talking to a microphone. So, sorry, who?
You're not that old.
Sorry, what was the question again? Sorry, can I ask?
Around
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so essentially what you're referring to is a private agreement between all the individual strata property holders. And my understanding is this agreement, although we're not party to it, that this agreement was based on, as the speaker mentions, the previous formula in terms of unit allocation. So if there's going to be a change, that would be a civil matter between those properties to go back and adjust that agreement. But again, the city, because it's private roadway, the city's not party to those agreements, nor were we party to the original formula. Sorry.
I guess my last question would be with regards to this urban node, what is called an urban node in the OCP. And I'm wondering if at this stage, when you now have a development in front of you that is going to have a huge impact on the urban node, why just a simple massing model cannot be put together. I mean, I could do it in my spare time if I was asked to, but if you just put a simple massing model made out of styrofoam, because that site is so crucial in how it is developed as an urban node. I don't think, a lot of people don't realize what could happen in an urban node and how big this proposed development is, which, as the last plan I saw, was a 5-story block, long linear building with 2 towers on each end. Well, that block of building is like 1.5 times bigger than Costco. Not as wide, but the length I'm talking about, the back of Costco. And this not only, Costco sits in a hole, it's down below grade, whereas this piece of land is quite high. In fact, it's one of the higher sections of that whole development area. And I think it's important for council to look at that in total. Otherwise, you may have a real eyesore on your hand, because this is, people don't realize the size of this project. And even in my, I sent in the notes about shadow, just the National Research Council in October, 3 times the height of the building shadow. Well, a 5-story building, which could be 60 or 65 feet high, is going to cast a shadow of, quite a big shadow for those neighbors. And I lived in a house in Burnaby amongst a whole bunch of trees in the shade, and my sister-in-law lived on the south bank of Vancouver. She would have her air conditioning on in the morning, and we had to turn on the heat. Well, that's from the shadow, from the shade, living in the shade. And people could be living in the shade over there for many hours of the day. And I think, again, it's part of your sustainability development. If that's what you have approved before, then this is the things you have to look at as members of council. I think that's it.
Thank you. Any questions for the delegation? Councillor Armstrong?
Yes, sir. Would it be fair to say that before, I believe the townhomes that you refer to were built after the original design was done, so people would have bought there knowing that it was going to be townhomes versus a 5-story building. Is that correct?
No, I was talking, well, not only a 5-story, but the 5-story building, I think that, again, that's more to do with the density development. I'm talking about phase 2 development.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I think the 5-story, it's actually a 6-story development that they're proposing. If you look at projects in Vancouver, they can be quite nice, but they have a bigger site. They don't fill the site as this project does.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak to Covenant Amendment Application Number CA11? Please, sir, if you could come forward, introduce yourself, give us your address.
My name is Philip Smithick. I live at 6310 McRobb Avenue. And I received this in the mail from the city of Nanaimo last week. And it is very vague and virtually impossible to understand from a normal person's point of view. And that has put a lot of people off. Now, I am a member on the council of the strata at 6310. And we had a meeting today, and I was advised to come along and ask all councillors if they knew what a covenant was. And they also suggested too that there's going to be definitely there's going to be legal repercussions if this goes through. I just wanted to let you know that, gentlemen, ladies. And I really have no more to say about it, but we're all in that apartment block very, very unhappy about this whole situation.
If I may just respond, a covenant, I think it's fair to say we all understand, is a very lovely word, biblical in connotation, for an agreement between parties. In this case, the covenant was entered into between the owners, developers of the land, and the city of Nanaimo, and which is why, in order to amend the covenant, it has to come back here for approval if one party, the other party, the owners, have requested a change to it. Is there anyone else wishing to speak to Covenant Amendment Application Number CA11? Councillor Martman.
Thank you.
No, pardon me. Any further submissions, Ms. Robertson? So we've received a number. Council's had a chance to see all of them, I'm aware. We've received nothing further. Very good. Now, Councillor Martin,
Thank
sorry.
you. I'll move the motion that council direct staff to amend covenants FB 226410 and FB 287633.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. Councillor Armstrong.
I'll be voting against this. I think a lot of those people purchased their homes afterwards based on what the original plan was, which was 8 townhomes, which would not have an impact on shadowing, the ability to enjoy in their own yard, and a covenant is supposed to be a binding promise. So they did their due diligence when they looked at that. So for those reasons, I'll be voting against the request for the covenant amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lindsay, something you wish to?
No, sorry.
No? Just wanted to get near the mic?
Just get ready.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thanks, Mr. Lindsay. Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I gave this one a lot of thought, and I visited the site more than once. I am not going to be able to support this recommendation for the same reasons I think that Councillor Armstrong just indicated. This original whole project was based on Council of the day approving a mix of housing types. The 2 towers, which we've since added on to height. There was the 4-story developments, which are very popular there, and there was also to be more ground-oriented housing in terms of the townhouses. That was the agreement. That was why the project went ahead at the day. Certainly, we can change that now if we wish to, but to me, that's not fair to the people that have purchased there, expecting that mix of development. And to go from townhouses to suddenly a 6-story structure with, I think, 66 units. The traffic issue is also important for me onto that Sentinel Drive, which is very small. So I just cannot support this change in the covenant. I don't think it's fair to those that have been living there, and it wasn't the original intent of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Any further discussion? Councillor Turley and then Councillor Gesselbrock.
Pardon the mask, but I never know who spat on this. So I have a question for staff with regard to attachment B. I know we're not supposed to be discussing the towers, but the subject of the 5-story condo between the 2 towers was brought up. And on this detachment, I don't see a 5-story condo developed between the 2 towers. So I'm sort of thinking that the 6-story one over on the east side is replacing that. I don't know if you can answer that for me. Thanks.
Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship, through to Councillor Turley. So, yes, what we're looking at here is one of the earlier versions by a previous owner that was secured by covenant. So the townhomes are on the right, the 2 towers on the left-hand side of the image. Since the purchase of the property, the new owners are interested in replacing the townhomes with a 6-story building and looking more at what we would describe as a podium development with 2 point towers, rather than the plan that was original, which was sort of the two towers, freestanding towers. That would be subject to a future development permit application, which we do not have. They've put a conceptual image together, I think, which they've shared with the neighbors, which shows a design that has that podium base that connects the 2 towers. So that's part of their long-term plan to have both that and the 6-story tower, or sorry, the 6-story building is actually the subject of the covenant amendment tonight. Sorry.
Satisfied, Councillor Turley? Thanks very much. Councillor Gesselbrock?
Thank you, Worship. I can't support the change of the covenant based on for the same reasons Councillor Armstrong and Thorpe articulated. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Any further comments? Councillor Brown.
Possibly the unpopular opinion, but I will be in support of this. I think the original plan is sprawl with towers. This essentially takes some measures to address that and see some more gentle density that I think would improve the site overall as it develops. So I think when we see these types of developments, they can look sort of foreboding and on paper, but over the long run, they contribute to complete neighborhoods. And I think we have an overabundance of detached units, and these types of units are, we do need more of them in the city, and it is zoned for this type of density, so I will be supporting it.
Thank you very much. For what it's worth, I too will be supporting this. I appreciate the concerns of the nearby residents and owners, and similar concerns are generally often and almost always expressed by any moves towards densification in our city, whether it be in the old city quarter area or in other parts of our community. The nodal concept, this is part of it, was put in place to deal with a city that expanded to ridiculous size in terms of its geography, which is my patent phrase on these comments: too much geography and too little population. This is one of the methods, and I appreciate it does impact on the number of residents who are already present and nearby. But as someone pointed out, today's expensive housing is tomorrow's inexpensive housing, and encouraging us to go upwards as opposed to out so that we have livable neighborhoods so that people can, within reason, and this is a good example next to a mall that it is, very close and not far from Costco and across the road, Woodgrove, so to speak. It all encourages walkability and livability to that extent, and so I, for one, will be supporting the proposal. We don't have the motion on, yes, we do. Yes, we do. It's been such a long debate. Any further discussion? All those in favor? And opposed? Councillors Armstrong, Gesselbrock, and Thorpe, and Hemmens. Mr. Lindsay. Rezoning application number RA 444-30 Lorne Place, please.
Thank you, Worship. As you mentioned, a rezoning application for the subject property to rezone from the duplex zone R4 to low density residential R6. The applicant is proposing to retain the existing duplex that's on the property and add 4 additional units. Your Worship, there's a site plan attachment B in your report, and there's an air photo attachment C.
Any questions for Mr. Lindsay? Councillor Martman.
Motion that zoning amendment bylaw 2020 number 4500.177 to rezone 30 Lorne Place from duplex residential R4 to low density residential R6 pass first reading.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
Motion that zoning amendment bylaw 2020 number 4500.177 pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. Councillor Martman.
Motion that council direct staff to secure the community amenity contribution, road dedication, and access easement should council support the bylaw at third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is item G, rezoning application number RA 448-2013 Northfield Road. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Worship. Another rezoning application, this time on the subject property on Northfield Road. This happens to be on the south side of Northfield Road, and a request to rezone the property from R1, which is single residential dwelling, to Corridor 1, which is our residential corridor zone. The applicants are proposing to construct 9 purpose-built rental units. There's a concept plan on attachment B and an aerial photo on attachment D. Thank you.
No question. Motion that zoning amendment.
Councillor go ahead, move the motion.
You'll ask after a second. That zoning amendment bylaw 2020 number 4500.176 to rezone 2013 Northfield Road from single dwelling residential R1 to residential corridor COR1 pass first reading.
Seconder, Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Bonner.
It was just a question for staff, if I may. Had an opportunity to drive by the property, because it's just close to where I live. And it wasn't so much it's unfortunate that we're just putting more residential without commercial on Northfield, but this is what they want, so that's fine. My question was the alleyway in behind the property is very narrow. A number of the residents have moved right up to almost to the pavement with various planters and things like that. And there happens to be a rather deep ditch on the south side of the alleyway. And so there's absolutely no way for two cars to go beside each other to get in and out, and that is the only entrance to that. And we already have another place that just built recently there and has their access from there. So what plans does the city have to make that, I would think, that alleyway a little bit safer, because literally it's got to be a 2-foot ditch on the south side of the alleyway?
Your Worship, I can't speak to whether there's any specific improvements in the 5-year capital plan. I'd have to follow up with council. What I would note is that, and I think the property you're mentioning, if you look at the air photo here, it's 2 properties to the west, was developed with fee simple townhomes a number of years ago, and at that time we took dedication off the lane and they had to do lane improvements. The same would be the case here, that we'd be looking for dedication off the lane to allow for lane widening, lane improvements, but it still wouldn't go in and replace the entire laneway. It would just be that portion in front of the property. So there's nothing in the immediate plan that I'm aware of for upgrades on the lane, city upgrades on the lane.
Do we ever make lanes that are one-way?
Yes, I certainly can think of, there's some cases where we have done that in the city. I'm not sure if it's ever been evaluated by engineering on this laneway or not, but it is something that has been implemented where there is a narrow laneway. I would note that we have a number of lanes, especially in the old city, that are extremely narrow and are really function as one-way lanes, but are not restricted, because what happens is that it requires the driver to slow to such a point that they navigate and find their way through, and they tend not to create problems in terms of excessive speed or collisions, but they're able to they somewhat manage the traffic through their narrowness or through their design.
Yeah, I appreciate the slowing of the speed concept. In this particular, I was just concerned about the ditch, which travels most of the entire lane. It's quite deep, and there is no way of not driving into it by accident. So okay. I'm in favor of the rezoning. I'm concerned about that.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Martman. You're opposed. Sorry, Councillor Armstrong.
Motion that zoning amendment bylaw 2020 number 4500.176 pass second reading.
Seconded. Councillor Brown. Any discussion? Councillor Armstrong? No. Hearing none. All those in favor? Contrary? No one opposed? You are opposed, Councillor Armstrong. Thank you. Councillor Martman, please.
Motion that council direct staff to secure the community amenity contribution, road dedication, and driveway access covenant prior to adoption of the bylaw, should council support the bylaw at third reading.
Seconded. Councillor Brown. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. You're opposed, Councillor Armstrong? Yes?
We're voting for covenants now.
Thank you very much. The next is item H, COVID-19 response to downtown restaurant patios. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'll introduce this report. I would note that Mr. Corson's here in the audience with us, and Mr. Corson and his team actually put this report together late last week, as this has been one of those evolving issues coming out of the COVID-19 response. So Mr. Corson's here. If there's any specific questions, I may pull him up to the podium. I would start by, in general, saying that this comes out of the province's restart program. As we all know, we're moving into the next phase, which includes allowing the opening of restaurants. However, with that comes some restrictions, and generally they're talking about limiting the occupancy numbers within restaurants to about 50% of their previous occupancy load. So obviously, as an operator of a restaurant who's interested in opening and seeing business return to normal, it's very difficult to do so if you're only able to use half of your previous patrons. So there's been looking at other options, including looking at expanding outdoor seating opportunities for these restaurants. And this report's in response to that and those types of initiatives. So I would start by saying we have an existing long-standing patio program in the downtown. We have agreements with many restaurants to either to utilize surplus public space in terms of sidewalks or boulevards, or in rare cases, we have also closed off parking stalls and done items such as parklets over the years, all with the idea of having more seating space on Commercial Street, creating more of a public realm. In this case, this proposal to expand that through this interim period, allowing for more external, more patio spaces in the downtown. This would involve closing down some parking spaces on Commercial Street specifically, although this program is also being discussed in the Old City Quarter and on those restaurants that front on public thoroughfares in the Old City Quarter. So the recommendation, Your Worship, is to the Council direct staff to implement this temporary program during this COVID-19 pandemic, and that we reallocate $25,000 from the current downtown events grants. Of course, many of those events that have previously been given grants are not going to be able to proceed in 2020. So we reallocate some of that money to fund this, and then ultimately the cost recovery would come back from any of these property owners or restaurant operators who wish to lease the space over the next 2 years. So, Your Worship, that's the introduction to the report, and happy to answer any questions. There's also a somewhat related, not directly related, but somewhat related email that came in from the Liquor Control and Regulation Branch, which is attached here to your agenda. It came in late on Friday, and it's specifically dealing with the province asking local governments how they want to deal with this topic, but around specifically liquor primary uses. So that would be like your pubs and nightclubs, and in manufacturer's license. So that would be like your brew pubs or your distilleries that have tasting rooms. This is not about food primary. The provincial request is not about food primary. So most of what we're talking about in the report is actually restaurants that have food primary licenses. Very few, if any, especially in the downtown, would be liquor primary. But we are attaching it here because it's somewhat related, and we have distributed late this afternoon some options for council's consideration for motions related to that provincial request. But there's sort of two items here, Your Worship, and happy to answer any questions on either of those.
Councillor Armstrong and then Councillor.
Thank you.
Yes, I see you both. Councillor Armstrong first.
So I've received numerous emails and calls from other restaurant owners in the community that feel that this is placing an unfair advantage to the businesses downtown and that it's not fair to them. And my concern under the community charter, we should not be doing that. So I would like to see this be expanded to all restaurants, because I don't think it's right that we're only going to look after one small group and then the rest are left to flounder on their own. So that's my concern with this. I think if we're going to do it for the downtown core, we should also be looking for the ones up in the country club area, the north end, all over the city, because the city doesn't revolve just around the downtown. We have to be fair to all businesses. So that's my concern. So unless it's amended to include other businesses, other restaurants, I won't be supporting. Thank you.
Your Worship, can I respond to that? Because I think Councillor Armstrong raises an important point. And first of all, there's a couple items there. But first of all, the assistance to business, the idea is that any cost put into this by the city would be recovered from restaurants who were going to lease back that space, so that we would address that very important community charter question and making sure that we're not providing support to business. The second part is the downtown and the Old City Quarter maybe are somewhat unique in the city, is that they're one of the few places where we actually have restaurants, cafes that actually front immediately on a public road. And that actually there is no other place for them to set up external patio spaces other than in the public road. Many of those places, I wouldn't say all, but many of the places you're talking about outside of the downtown, whether the Country Club or Woodgrove, are generally restaurants that are on large properties, that are on large privately owned properties. And if they were going to expand their outdoor patios, which many of them have, it would be an expansion onto that private property. So again, that is, if they were a liquor primary, that is something that the province is saying that they would expedite that application. If they're a food primary and they want to expand their area. Again, it's on private property. If council wanted to be clear about that and their support to make sure that you're sending consistent messaging, I think a motion about the support of those temporary temporary patios on private lots would be appropriate. Not necessary, but it would be appropriate, and send the message that we're treating all operators consistently.
Thank you, that satisfies my concerns.
Councillor, I have to think about this. It says Councillor Martman, but
Well, I do want to.
yes, sorry, back and forth. And Councillor Turley and Councillor Thorpe.
So my question was, because we haven't made a motion at this time, and I know that this agenda was prepared prior to the email coming out from the government on late Friday afternoon, and it's kind of getting convoluted because we've got this one talking about restaurants, and then we also are looking at the motion that would probably come later about all liquor primary, right? And so it could include restaurants, bars, et cetera, et cetera. I think absolutely we want to see our businesses that can succeed as soon as possible. Is it, I'm not sure who to direct this question to, but what if we did the motion that implemented a temporary patio program in response to the phased reopening, and therefore we're not necessarily designating it to downtown, as we know we've got direction to give permission to all servers, restaurants, et cetera.
Your worship, I think there could be a subsequent motion there that maybe somebody wants to table that talks about that more broadly. I think the 2 points of decision for council tonight is, one is what's unique again about the downtown is you're talking about the use of public space. And essentially the question is, are you prepared to allow for the use of public space to facilitate these patios? And I think that's the ultimate question for you, and that's why downtown and the Old City Quarter is a little bit unique. The second question, and I apologize, I know it's getting very blurred here. It was put on the agenda because it seemed like a logical place to have that discussion. But the second question for council is, because the province has decided they're going to fast track patio approvals and expansions for liquor primaries and for manufacturing licenses, they're asking local governments, what role do you want to have in that? Do you want to also have an expedited fast track policy, or do you want to stand by your more traditional policies of evaluating each application? So two separate questions, but they are somewhat connected.
So really they are separate issues to a certain degree, and so my suggestion, I haven't made any motion yet, but of keeping them separate for council, that we're doing something for the downtown area, which is really being devastated in our city, but that we're also aware that we're going to be able to broaden it in a further motion coming down the pipe, so we'll just keep it separate, I would think. So can I make a motion?
I would, let's just go through the questions first, if you don't mind. Councillor Turley, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I took it upon myself this morning to contact some businesses on Commercial Street and in the surrounding areas, not specifically restaurants, but other types of businesses. I think I sent out 12 emails, of which I received 3 responses. I had 3 bad addresses, so it wasn't a bad return. The 3 were not restaurant owners, but they have businesses downtown. They have no problem with the patio concept. Some of them were concerned about losing parking spaces, and I'm thinking like, yeah, but there's lots of empty parking spaces in all the parkades, so I don't really think that's an issue, but I didn't tell them that. And then the one thing they were all against was to close Commercial Street down to cars over an extended period of time. They thought the idea of having these patios on the street from whenever they can get there in June sometime through to sometime in October is probably going to help drive more traffic downtown, and they seem to be in favor of it. And these 3 were businesses that I have respect for, so thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe?
My concern has been answered, thank you.
Thank you. It shows Councillor Martin, which I think counts as Councillor Hemmons tonight. Is that no? All right. Given that there's nobody in Councillor Martin's spot, I don't know how this is working, but Councillor, well, it says Councillor Brown, and it actually is Councillor Brown. So now we've swapped back. Thank you. We're getting corrected through the evening. But old guys find it confusing, you know.
Thank you, Worship. And thank you, Mr. Lindsay, for the clarity on some of these items to help sort it out. I do have a prepared subsequent motion that sort of speaks to some of the issues that have been raised, with the understanding that it really is just to endorse the expansion of something that's already possible between private restaurants and private landowners with respect to parking, but I think it might add some clarity for folks at the council table and also in the community. So I think there's still speakers on the list, but I have a motion prepared to follow these two if whenever it's appropriate, Your Worship.
Let's go to Councillor Bonner, and then I'm going to call on Councillor Martman for the motion that is the recommended motion, and we can deal with the other draft that has been prepared by staff respecting liquor licensing and perhaps yours. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Your Worship. My question, Mr. Lindsay, is more along the lines of the organizations that may be on private land but aren't liquor primary, which this letter from the province is dealing with specifically. Having chatted with a number of the pub owners, they're more than willing to be able to expand anywhere they can just to get their numbers up, and not even willing to increase the amount of people, just get to the roughly the levels they were before, and I totally support that. I'm also wondering then, what about the restaurants who are food primary? What is the process to have them add on patio space, and how can we make that really, really simple?
Yeah, maybe I'll get Mr. Holm to come up, because I think he's looked into this a little more closely, but from my understanding is the province already has an option available where they can make application to their system to allow for a temporary expansion to an external patio space on private property, so that they can expedite that. There is generally, because they're prepared to approve that, there is no role necessarily that the city would have in that, assuming that they're going to do something as simple as close off parking stalls and temporarily put some tables and chairs, and there'd be no building permits, there'd be no development permits. I think technically somebody could argue that they're in violation of the parking bylaw because they've reduced the parking, but we've traditionally treated those types of temporary seasonal uses as being acceptable and not something that we would enforce on. So I don't think it's necessarily that the city would have a role in that. I don't think it hurts that if council passes a motion saying that you're supportive of these temporary expansions to give certainty and clarity to operators around the community that the idea is that council wants to treat everyone the same and is encouraging generally businesses to take these steps during this extreme times because they need to operate, that we hear them and recognize that.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Martin, would you care to make the recommended motion?
I move that council direct staff to implement a temporary downtown restaurant patio program in response to the phased reopening of businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic. And reallocate $25,000 from the downtown event grants to facilitate the temporary improvements with any shortfall funding to be funded from council's strategic infrastructure reserve.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Turley, any discussion on this motion? Councillor Armstrong?
And one thing I just remembered that came up at the accessibility meeting is, will there be attempts made so that those patios will be accessible for those on wheelchairs or walkers? Thank you.
That's a very good question, Your Worship. I should have mentioned that when I introduced it. Part of the reason why we want to actually put some structure in these parking spaces and not just have them cordoned off with planters is we want to remove that step down from the curb, because there's no, like you would find at an intersection, there's no way for anybody to get off of that curb down onto that parking level without stepping down. So the idea is that you would bring it all up to the same grade as the sidewalk, so it removes any of those accessibility concerns.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Your Worship. My the question here is, I know that according to the charter, we can't give loans, grants to business, that sort of thing. My question here is regarding where the situation of the patio and people being walking by. Two questions, actually. The first one is regarding walking by. Having looked at what Courtney's doing and some other cities doing, some of them have the pedestrians walking around, and so the patio tends to be more on the sidewalk, and they build something around it. Some of them in Courtney, they're putting everybody on the parking spot, and then people are still able to walk through the sidewalk. We're doing more of that model, I guess?
That is correct, Your Worship. And we have looked at all of those different options in the past, and Cumberland's another good local example where they've got people coming out around in order to move the patio spaces next to the building. It was just found generally downtown, given our conditions, the existing operating environment down there, that it was better to leave the patios generally where they are and expand onto them rather than doing a wholesale change at this time. I think in the future, if we ever get to the point of redoing Commercial Street and thinking about the whole public realm down there, I think that would be the time to kind of step back and look at those things, and would a wider sidewalk, for example, facilitate patios right next to the building. But absolutely, it's something that we've considered with each of these options. Yes.
Or the option is raising the level of the street so there are no more sidewalks. Big patios.
Yep.
My second question was...
Sims would have something to say about water again.
That's why we pay the good engineers to make it happen. My next question is regarding payment and building of these parklets. Is it the responsibility of the business owner to build one? And my suggestion is, why doesn't the city build them? Because then we'll know they'll all be consistently built to the same area, and that the business owners can then rent it, and then we manage storage so that the business owners don't have to do that.
Your Worship, I think
you want to detract from the unique approach that will be wrought by a multitude of businesses to make them conformist?
No.
Your Worship, it's more of the second option. I'll let Mr. Corson just elaborate on that a bit.
Thanks, Councillor Bonner. Yeah, that's exactly the way we'll be implementing these. We've just found from past experience, it's easier for us to build them. And we have our park staff actually lined up to do this, so we can implement very quickly. So if you get the go-ahead tonight,
That's fine.
we've already been in
I'm not
contact
really
with quite a few of the
staff.
property owners, and we will likely get started this week or next week and get them in. So if we have the private owners do it, then we have to review their drawings, and it'll delay things. So we feel that as a response for COVID and to help people out quickly, this is the fastest way is for us to lead it. Yeah.
Thank you. My thinking exactly.
Councillor Armstrong?
So would that same offer be made to other ones? Like I'm thinking of places like Milton Street Cafe that are facing onto the road, onto our streets, Gateway to India, Flavors of India, all of those. Would that same offer be there for them as well then?
Your Worship, generally anyone in the downtown context that has roads, or that has businesses that exit right out onto a public roadway could potentially be eligible for this program. But right now, our immediate conversations have been with the restaurants on Commercial Street and with some limited restaurants in the Old City Quarter.
And then
Absolutely could be expanded.
In the event of an accident, is it shared liability, or is the liability all with the city if we build them?
Yes, so the owner actually takes the liability insurance.
Thank you.
And this does not prevent
The restaurateur takes the liability. I guess we're the owner.
No, but this doesn't prevent us from expanding this program if it's successful too. Any further questions on this? I think it's fair to say we're all very conscious of the fact that you'd be hard-pressed to think of any aspect of our economy that has been more damaged than the hospitality industry. So this is a very positive step, not just for the downtown, but as a signal to the whole business community that we understand the pain and suffering they're undergoing, and the employees who have been without work now, many of them for a couple of months, what this means to them. All those in favor? Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next item is the email from the Liquor Control and Regulation Branch and Policy Directive dated 2020 May 22nd, temporary expanded service area authorization. Two draft motions have been prepared mercifully by staff. The first one is a pre-approval that directs staff to authorize pre-approval for all temporary service expansions of liquor primary and manufacturing licenses until October 31st, and suspend the current city approvals process so they don't have to come to us for a second review, so to speak. I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but to take a step or a bureaucratic step out of the process, leaving it more to the liquor branch if they have concerns, which they may well do, to deal with it. Alternatively, the second option is the direct staff to notify the liquor control LCRB, rather, that the City of Nanaimo has chosen to review and approve all of the individual requests for temporary service, etc., until October 31st, suspend the current city approval process for expansion, etc. For what it's worth, and I'm going to demonstrate bias here right off the bat, I'm in support of the option one that's been prepared by staff. As much as I appreciate there are some potential safety concerns about perhaps individuals being a bit expansive in understanding what this might mean or pushing the envelope, I think these are extraordinary circumstances that require us to recognize again that the hospitality industry has been particularly hard hit. Would Councillor Martman?
I would like to move option one, pre-approval.
Seconded. Is there any discussion on this? And please don't let my remarks stifle any discussion.
No.
Councillor Armstrong wisely spoke that my comments never stifle discussion. I'm pleased to hear it on the record. Councillor Bonner.
Your Worship, since I don't think this made it into the agenda, would it be appropriate to read it out instead of just option?
Thank you. I will read it out. That council directs staff to notify the LCRB that the City of Nanaimo has authorized pre-approval for all temporary service area expansions for liquor primary and manufacturing licenses until October 31st, 2020 in response to LCRB Policy Directive 20-13, and two, to suspend the current city approval process for temporary service expansion of all liquor primary and manufacturing licenses until October 31st, 2020.
Thank you, Councillor Martman, and thank you, Councillor Bonner. Any discussion on this, Councillor? I have Councillor, no? Well, who is Councillor Martman now then? Is it actually Councillor Martman?
Yes. I guess it is. Oh, I've got it.
Did you want to say anything to the motion? Good.
Except for that I support it.
Thank you. Then we'll go to Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. Quickly through you to staff, I understand from the timelines here that the staff report was prepared before the letter from the LCRB. I'm just curious that our temporary patio program in the staff report had the date ending September 30th, and this goes till October 31st. In the event that somebody received approval for a temporary patio space into October 31st, and it included that expanded patio, would our program just sort of respect that, or how would we address that?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. That's a good question. And again, as Councillor Brown noted, our report was done a few days ahead, and this email came out just Friday afternoon. So we certainly could amend our program to mirror those dates, and that would probably be logical. I think we were thinking about what's the typical patio season and when do we normally see under our existing agreements patios close up. We could certainly modify it to be clear if we do any agreements downtown temporary that they tied to the same calendar. However, I would note that all of the parties that we're talking to date are not liquor primary licenses, so they would not necessarily be subject to that, but it would be better to have one date that everybody was clear to, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Sorry. Thanks, Mr. Lindsay. Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I wanted to point out that date discrepancy as well. But the second thing, and I am in support of this motion, Your Worship, but I'm also feeling slightly uncomfortable in that I feel that we're focusing all of our efforts on one aspect of our business community, and that is restaurants and bars/pubs. And we're giving them a break, or the government's giving them a break in terms of licensing, in terms of using extra space outside. Is that fair to other businesses? What about somebody who wants to be bold and start a new family business? Are we going to give them a break on a business license application? What if a shoe store wants to set up outside to allow people to browse their wares there? Are we going to let them have patio space? So I just mention that as something that gives me some discomfort, that I think we're focusing all of our attention right now on one aspect. And maybe that's just a good starting point, but I think it's something we should bear in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe, and I might say my earlier remarks apply. This does not restrict council from expanding programs that may assist in our economic recovery regardless of business, but I think this is also a tangible recognition that anyone who sells liquor in this province still faces a myriad of regulations that don't apply to other businesses. It's a lot easier to open up a hardware store than it is to open up a restaurant. And so I think this is just a realistic recognition of, in particular, a group of downtown restaurateurs who've come to City Hall and said, look, we have particular problems, we're prepared to do this, we need to do this. And I think it's a response to a very highly self-motivated group. So I personally will be supporting it. Councillor Brown. And then Councillor Bonner, Councillor Bonner, Armstrong, and Turley.
Thank you, Worship. My question is more on the, not only, I'm very much in favor of the motion, but also protecting the public as well. So my question is regarding managing the inspection of the sites. Now, I know that we're saying that we're temporarily not doing that, but in terms of distancing, setting up proper distancing, that sort of thing, whose responsibility is it to manage that? Does it rest to our bylaws, or does it rest with the health department?
So I think there's two parts to that answer, Your Worship. There's the directives that have come down provincially for all classes of buildings and how they're supposed to develop their plans. So the individual businesses are responsible for putting plans in place that reflect the provincial guidance. And the province has said it's their responsibility to review those when required. I think on liquor primary licenses, there's the added component where the branch itself has the ability to review and inspect these licensed premises. And to be clear, they've said all along that the program, this expedited program, is not intended to allow people this opportunity to expand their occupancy, but rather take their existing occupancy numbers and redistribute them. So it's all about making sure that there's sufficient space for their clients and not necessarily new clientele.
Yeah.
Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, also to that, WorkSafe would also come into play. They have to follow their WorkSafe stuff, so they'd be responsible. But just back to what Councillor Thorpe said, I agree what you're saying, but I also look at, we have to have a starting spot. This is our starting spot, and I would like to think if other businesses have the same concerns, that they come together and come to us with a plan, which I'm sure we would be able to support. And this is what's happened. In this case, the restaurants have gotten together, and I'm satisfied after listening to Mr. Lindsay that this can expand to our northern restaurants if required. So I think we have to remember it's a starting point, and I'm sure once the mayor's task force is up and about and the economic whatever, we might get some other really good, unique ideas, but at least it's a starting point to start getting some people back to work and make some money. Thank you.
Councillor Turley, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to, in answer to Councillor Thorpe's concern, I'm privy to some information from the Chamber of Commerce that they are developing a shopping website for smaller businesses that is similar to a lot of the larger companies that have order online and pick up at the curb. So we could be looking at a request from downtown businesses of parking not parking restrictions, but easement for their curbside pickup. So there may be other options coming. So.
10 minutes free, come and see. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you very much. Councillor Brown, you were talking about a motion?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I have two here, but the first one deals directly with some of the conversation, and thanks to staff for sort of helping me navigate this earlier and prepare something that sort of speaks to it and hopefully provides some clarity for council and the community. So I'd like to move that council endorse the temporary use parking spaces on private property for commercial business patio expansions to address medical health orders that support physical distancing requirements during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Never like motions on the fly, really don't. But having said that, read it again, please.
Absolutely, and I will, of course, email it to staff so they have the exact wording. But that council endorse the temporary use of parking spaces on private property for commercial business patio expansions to address medical health orders that support physical distancing requirements during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I can speak to it if there's a seconder.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Gesselbrock? Okay. So the intent of the motion, as I understand, is quite simply that, for instance, and I use the pub closest to me, the Wellington, the Well, that they would be able to expand their patio service, existing patio service, onto their parking spots on their private property, and we're endorsing that concept.
Absolutely. As it stands now, for the most part, there is no city regulation that stands in the way of that. That's an agreement between the business and the landowner. But, you know, I've received a couple of emails. There was some conversation. I think it just makes sense to make that clear that that's a position that we support, and go figure it out if that's something you want to do.
Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Worship. I support it because not only it doesn't actually deal specific with restaurants, it just says businesses, which allows time for businesses that maybe have narrow aisles to put some of their stuff outside. I'm quite in support of the idea, so I think that's a good idea.
I can think of Midland Tools and Liquidators, for instance, who already use part of their parking lot on a regular basis, which, you know, is a choice that business can make, whether if you limit your parking, perhaps you limit your customers, but it also allows for people to see the goods you have to merchandise. Any further comments on this? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Carried. Councillor Brown?
I'm actually going to hold off, and I think this is more appropriate as a notice of motion. I had some conversation with staff very briefly, but I think it deviates too far from the topic at hand.
Okay, thank you. I think that deals with everything under the COVID-19 response. On to 285 Prideaux Street, licensed to BC Housing. Mr. Lindsay, it's a long evening for you.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is to present to Council a short-term license agreement, as you mentioned, with BC Housing in order to establish an emergency response center at the city-owned building, the Community Services Building at 285 Prideaux. A copy of the agreement's attached to the report, and it includes the normal traditional things that you expect to see in a licensing agreement, including term and defining the area and who's responsible for utility costs. But I would also note, given the unique use that's being proposed, there's other items that we've recommended be included in part of this agreement, which includes that there be 24/7 security provided on site, and that there be a no visitor policy for guests staying at the emergency response center.
Thank you. I move that council approve the short-term license agreement for BC Housing Emergency Response Center in a portion of the city-owned Community Services Building at 285 Prideaux Street.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Bonner. Any discussion on this? Councillor Martman.
And just so the public is aware, because sometimes we pass things and then maybe the public hasn't seen the committee meetings or the other meetings that we have, but we have discussed this in detail and prolonged it. So this is a final process. This is just a step. So thank you.
And I think for the record, it needs to be recognized that the concept behind this is that it's to deal with the COVID-19 crisis. It is to isolate people who have the virus or have been exposed to and may present a danger to the larger public, not just the quote-unquote homeless population of our community, but others with whom they may come in contact, that this is a necessary medical response, and it must be viewed as such. Any further discussion or anything arising? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is item J, public hearings following Ministerial Order M139. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is just simply an information report. We wanted to give council a heads up as we move into our next scheduled public hearing, which is actually June the 18th. So it's coming up in a few weeks. Ministerial Order 139 was actually an amendment to an earlier order which gives some special rules and provisions during this pandemic time around council meetings. 139 expanded that to give some additional abilities to local governments when they're dealing with public hearings. And it actually gives the ability for councils to hold electronic or virtual public hearings. In this case, we've reviewed the order and we've received legal advice and we've amended our public hearing process. So going forward, the report outlines this in more detail, but going forward, there'll be the opportunities for people to do the traditional come to a public hearing, and we'll have physical distancing measures and steps in place to make sure that can be done. People can provide written submissions to public hearings as they've always been able to do. The additional item under the order will be that people will have the opportunity to participate online, and specifically the meeting itself will be streamed so that people can participate by watching the meeting at home, but also there'll be a phone line set up so that anybody wanting to make a presentation to council but feeling uncomfortable of coming out into the public will have the opportunity. So the phone line system will be set up, people will phone in and queue, we'll introduce them to council. As the meeting progresses, they'll be able to make their presentation like anybody else. It'll just be over the phone, and council will be able to receive their input. So, Your Worship, we just, again, just for information, wanted to give you a heads up as we moved into our next public hearing.
Councillor Martman and then Councillor Armstrong.
And so in reading this, we would now be live streaming the meetings. We have had some citizens in the past that really wanted the public hearings public. This happened.
Councillor Armstrong and then Councillor Turley.
People will still be able to come in person as recorded.
Yeah, absolutely, Your Worship, through Councillor Armstrong. So the traditional methods of the public hearing will all exist. If somebody feels comfortable attending, we'll have, just like tonight, we'll have physical distancing set up here in the chamber that people can attend. However, it's felt that during this time, and because the province has given this ability, that we should also, the advice is we should also take advantage of it. So if somebody's at home, feeling like they want to participate, but feel uncomfortable in coming out into this environment, can still do so. So trying to satisfy both.
Thank you. Councillor Turley, please.
So the question I have is around ability of hearing, which I know comes as a big surprise. But, the problem with the setup as we have now, and I don't know if it's specifically to Zoom, is that anybody on those mics you can hear. So a person phones in, asks a question. If they're on this microphone here, I'd lay odds they won't hear the answer. So I don't know what can be done to resolve it. But I had a challenge today, and I have had in the past. So I'm not complaining, I'm just suggesting we think about that first.
Councillor Armstrong.
Another thing, this did come up at the accessibility meeting too. They can't hear it either, so they would ask, can we be looking at closed captioning, which would really help a lot of people. So that did come up. We also had the same problems with our Zoom meeting, that the person that was hearing impaired really struggled with it. Thank you.
Mr. Rudolph.
Comment, we'll look at the current temporary fixes we can do, but as you recall, Council authorized an expenditure of last year's surplus, some monies to improve the technology in this room. Slagan is leading that initiative to coordinate a review of all aspects of technology, because as you know, we seem to have routine failures or challenges, and challenges of even getting our presenters to be on screen and so forth. So that's something that we'll be able to present to you in sometime in the not too distant future, is to how to actually improve the automation in this, the audio and the visual. So that's coming, but right now we'll do the best what we can. And it is really a quilt work of very antiquated equipment that we're working with here.
Ms. Robertson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to let you know, and perhaps IT could speak more to this, but in response to Councillor Turley's question, this phone system will give us the ability to do voiceover, and so it would actually come from this spot here, and a switch is being put in, so it should be a lot clearer than using that microphone there.
Good news. Mr. Lindsay, thank you very much. The next is item 9, bylaw, zoning amendment bylaw number 2020, number 4500.175. Pardon me, Councillor Bonner, how could I ignore you? I'm sorry.
It's quite all right. I mean, it's actually a relatively minor point. I was supporting Councillor Martmans in pointing out the obvious irony of had we voted in favor of myself and a few others to start broadcasting public hearings, we'd all be on our way home right now. So.
But then we wouldn't have the company of one another.
So I'm going to move the motion that zoning amendment bylaw 2020 number 4500.175 to amend Schedule A zoning map with general mapping amendments pass third reading.
Seconder, Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. We have no correspondence that we haven't already dealt with.
We've got short-term solutions.
Yes, we're coming under other business.
Other business.
No notices of motion. So we now have items 4B and 5 from today's earlier meeting. 4B is short-term solutions for cleanliness in public spaces. Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll be very brief. My colleague, Mr. Dalliron, is here, and I believe Ms. Davis is in the building as well. So they are the co-authors of this report, along with Mr. LaBerge. And so this issue's been on our radar before. We were in front of council last fall when we spoke about how we respond and the preponderance of time that bylaw officers spend picking up garbage. So experimentally last fall, we shifted some public works staff to support that initiative. And I would say over time, it's evolved to, it's a much more cohesive and a much more effective unit. So we're working with bylaw, RCMP, Parks and Rec staff, and our sanitation crew to sort of hit some of these areas all in the same spot. So I'll turn the mic over to Ms. Davis and Mr. Dalliron. The main focus of this evening's topic or discussion is around the funding for the additional staff that we've put on this initiative, and noting some of the early comments today from council meeting around the Wesley Street requests. So that's, they're in some ways they're very much related, and in some ways this is a simple financial ask as well.
Ms. Davis, good evening.
Good evening, Your Worship. Good evening, Council. I'm here before you tonight wearing my old hat as Manager of Sanitation. This is something that I started before I became into my new position in November. The Social Disorder Response Team began as a trial back in November as a response to a very specific type of social disorder that we had been seeing, and that in particular relates to the issue of hoarding. So please excuse the simplicity of this presentation. I expect much of this evening's discussion will come out in the questions. So the idea behind the initial social disorder response team was to relieve the strain from the Bylaw Services Department, who were finding that with this particular type of social disorder, they were tasked with removing detritus from our streets and parks. That is something that was taking away from their other duties. It was quickly apparent that the Sanitation Department were much better able to provide that service than the Bylaw Services Department, and make our city a safe space. So the Social Disorder Response Team works out of the Sanitation Department. It is a team of 2 people with 1 vehicle. They report to the Sanitation Unit and work very closely with Bylaw on a daily basis. They dispatch out of Public Works Yard and convene with the Bylaw Services crew every morning the key hotspot areas, and then decide upon their initial problem points based upon the work orders that we receive. It's an innovative program. This is the first time that the Sanitation Department has really stepped outside of streets. Usually there's a very clear line that we haven't crossed. Sanitation Department has never worked in parks before, and so this was quite innovative, and we found it to be quite an efficient way of doing business. We are able to support this bylaw team by seeing the whole problem. We're there for them across the city. Social disorder, and particularly this issue of hoarding materials, is seen across the whole city. It's in parks where we've got encampments and abandoned materials. It's on our streets when we've got the shopping carts that are abandoned as well. And the key issue here is that we need to respond quickly. If we don't respond quickly, what we see is that the materials get spread about, and in particular with the encampments, they grow. So really it's that rapid response that we need to provide to the bylaw services team. So that's why we work so closely together. I would say that we have relieved the team of probably, about 2 to 3 hours a day that they've gotten back by the SDRT doing this work, and that is work that they can do, spend on doing their other tasks that they are really primarily here for. Taj, since he has been manager, has brought in some changes to the programme which I think have been fabulous. That is an earlier start, and then also adding in sweeping. So in the morning in the downtown we get in, clean it out with bylaw services, and the sweeper follows through afterwards, which I think has been very, very worthwhile. So I've got some images here of the type of thing that the social disorder response team are seeing. On the left there, you've got the leftovers of an encampment in a park, and on the right there, you've got some detritus that was actually pulled out of one of the buildings at Caledonia Park. Believe it or not, that stuff was on the right built up over a matter of days. And that's where I'm saying if you don't get in and stop it, it just gets worse and worse and worse. These are not valuable items that we're taking, contrary to popular opinion. Really, anything that is valuable, like if it's someone's personal papers, we always put them to a side and make sure that we link them up with the persons who they are. Most of these materials, unfortunately, end in landfill. And that is, we're not able to, it's not sanitary materials that we're able to save or recycle, unfortunately. So you've got some lumber. You are actually, some of the encampments that we're seeing are rather more sophisticated. A lot of shopping carts, so the number of shopping carts were already exceeding last year's target, last year's count actually of shopping carts already this year. So the recommendation is that Council fund the social disorder response team for 2020. That gives a dedicated rapid response to clean up detritus from our parks and our streets. The financial implication of that is $187,000, which is an unbudgeted expense, and that pays for the service from the 15th of March of this year to the end of December. That is the end of my very brief presentation.
Mr. Dellerin, you don't want some time at the mic tonight after all you're waiting? Councillor Martman.
Just before I make a motion, I just want to express, and I know Council feels this way, thank you, and thank you for all the work that's done in cleaning up after. And I think it's really unfortunate that in our society that we have these issues, and we will continue to work hard as a council, but I am eternally grateful for all the work that has been done. And unfortunately, our city doesn't seem to have gotten cleaner. I'm seeing more graffiti, I'm seeing more issues. So I think this will be one of my best motions that I've ever moved, that council fund up to $187,000 for the provision of the City of Nanaimo Social Disorder Response Team from the Special Initiatives Reserve to run 5 days a week, and if I could, I'd go 7, 5 days a week until 2020, December 31st.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Armstrong. I have Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. 2 questions. So this team has been operational since November, and so by investing $187,000, we're actually not going to see an increase in the service. We're actually just going to allocate it appropriately because the pilot that began in November was actually pulling staff out of Public Works. So the same program will exist, we're just funding it appropriately.
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. Yes, there's nothing additional here.
Okay. And my second piece is that a question, do we only take materials that have been abandoned? Or are we going, like the personal property thing, these are people's mobile homes, and I just want to get a sense of what are what our interaction is with in terms of people's property.
So, again, through the chair, the way this works is we work very, very closely with the Bylaw Services Department. So, if there is an encampment or someone camping or sleeping rough, the Bylaw Services team will move them on if they're not supposed to be there, and they'll ask them to take their materials. It is the abandoned things that we are cleaning up.
Okay, thank you.
We're not stealing anyone's stuff.
I didn't think so.
No.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is with respect to the funding. Up until about a month ago, we were still talking about our budget and finalizing it, and I'm just curious if this program is being successful, and the pilot has sort of proven that out. Why are we funding it, or what is the recommendation to fund it from the Special Initiatives Reserve rather than maybe talking about a month ago and having it as a line item in the budget?
Mr. Dillon.
Chair, yes. Good evening. So far we have used the budget from our sanitation operations, but it's not sustainable to continue to use that budget. But also we are trying to do a comprehensive study, hopefully later on this year, to come up with a better planning and proper dealing with the situation. That's why we just ask for this money to be able to continue this program just till end of 2020.
Your Worship, I think I can confess part of the blame for the delay in getting it to council, but it's taken time to get a cohesive, comprehensive approach to this through all the departments. And you saw recently the police and bylaws stepped up a new program on Wesley just recently. So it's been an evolving thing, and it started out really with the parks, and now it's more added in some of the major street areas and that type of thing. So it's evolved to a much better place in terms of a more holistic approach. So I think it's taken longer than perhaps even staff wished it would have, because they were ready to come with a earlier version of this several months ago. But I think it's in a better place now. So the funding it's just the timing is the way it worked out.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Rudolph. Thank you for that. If this is proving out to be successful, continues to be a successful program, would we expect a business case for next year's budget?
I believe we will be seeing that need for a business case for a continuation into next year.
Okay, thank you very much.
Unfortunately, I don't think that's a positive comment ultimately. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. Similar concerns. I'm not sure that coming out of the Special Initiatives Reserve is the best place for the money. I view what's been happening as operations. It's staff time. I'm glad that it's taking place. I'm wondering if we shouldn't be actually taking out of our Special Operations Reserves, because it's really not a special initiative, and I expect it to be a regular operations come the end of this year when we come into our next budget. I would like to see it instead come out of the Operations Reserve, because I know that we'll have a lot more initiatives coming up in the future. And I think someone's going to speak to that.
Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, it's a good point, and excuse me. To Councillor Bonner's point, the reason this one was selected was because this was the most recent placement of the surplus from 2019. Excuse me. And the other part that I want to mention is that the intent is to go up to this amount. This would represent the full cost of the program. However, with some of the redeployments in parks and how things may yet unfold throughout the year, we may not need to dip that deeply into the fund.
Okay. If I just one last thing is it's unfortunate that it's a good thing that's taking place. It's unfortunate that we're spending a whole bunch of money on not proactive fixing of the problem, where this is reactive money. So hopefully that when we have our recommendations, that we have a lot more proactive money available. Thank you.
Hopefully someday the province of British Columbia and perhaps the federal government will have stepped up to their responsibilities instead of expecting municipal governments to deal with issues that are not properly ours, either jurisdictionally nor for which we have the appropriate funding. Councillor Armstrong.
I just wanted to do a shout out to Van Al Clean, who voluntarily have been cleaning a lot of our streams and ditches on their own dime and their own dollar. Very much appreciated. So I just wanted to formally acknowledge what they were doing for our city. Thank you.
Very good. Any further discussion? And I think we all echo Councillor Martman's comments when she made the motion with respect to staff. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much indeed. The next item is the correspondence from the Old City Quarter dated May. Yes, we already have. Thank you. Yes, I'm afraid we do. It is 9 p.m. My, how the time flies when you're having fun. We need a motion to, normally our adjournment time, a motion to proceed past 9.
So
moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Martman. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. We already have a motion on the floor with respect to the correspondence from the Old City Quarter, which Councillor Armstrong so kindly reminded me. Thank you very much. And perhaps, just for the sake of clarity for the public who may not have been listening this afternoon, perhaps we could read the motion out, a little on the clarity of the mayor.
So the motion that's on the, that would be on the floor would be that city staff work with the Old City Quarter Association to develop a framework and funding strategy for restoring security in the Old City Quarter and refer back to council for decision.
So moved.
No, it's moved.
Oh, it's already moved.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Brown, do you have something to add to illuminate this, perhaps, please?
Thank you, Worship. The letter itself is authored by 4 individuals. However, there also is, separate to those 4 individuals, the Old City Quarter Business Improvement Association. So this, my understanding is this letter does not represent that association. They're aware of it, and I think they're generally supportive, from what I understand, with their board of exploring the idea further. So I do think this motion speaks to the general conversation that should be having with all the property owners impacted, and I think the authors of the letter are very, very much expecting that conversation to occur with more than just those 4, the signatories of the letter. I would add one thing, and I think it might say the Old City Quarter, but it may need to be clarified to say the Business Improvement Association, because, but I do, if we recall from several months ago now, the association did present to council, and they also announced their formation then of the Old City Quarter Health and Safety Alliance, which was very much established to work on these sort of issues as a community, from a community up response. And so I do think a friendly amendment might be to incorporate, a friendly amendment would probably have to be a formal amendment at this point, to have it work with the Old City Quarter Business Improvement Association and the Old City Quarter Health and Safety Alliance, to loop them into the conversation. That includes sort of faith groups that are working on this item. I believe it includes some representation from the greater neighborhood as a whole. But I do agree with His Worship's comments from earlier today that we don't want to limit the speed at which we approach this problem, and work towards some solutions. And I don't think it would impact it. I think they would actually be very appreciative of being included, because it was established by the businesses and the different organizations within that to be part of these conversations and help shape them. So all that said, what I think this motion, the intention of this motion, and Councillor Armstrong can correct me if I'm wrong, is that we work with the businesses, we work with the signatories on the letter, and that the community in the Old City Quarter to explore a potential item that has been put forward and have that reported back to council for any decision-making points. So I would move that the motion be amended to read the Old City Quarter Business Improvement Association and the Old City Quarter Health and Safety Alliance as the
Discussion on the amendment. We've got a seconder.
Second.
Yes.
That was just a friendly amendment, sorry.
Let's do
Is
a
it
formal.
friendly?
Let's do a formal.
I'll rule it as a friendly amendment unless I see some objection. Nothing pleases me more than to be friendly. Ms. Robertson.
I think it would just be helpful to include the extra part about the Old Quarter Health Alliance if that's being added.
Sorry. Yes, we're good to go. All those in favor? Contrary, motion carries. Thank you. We're still under other business, and forgive me for being a bit pushy on this one, but we had a lengthy discussion today after we snuffed the term City Spark. And I've had some discussion with various members of council, and I salute the leadership of our CAO who, following my plaintive historical suggestion of entitling the whole process Imagine Nanaimo Again, suggested we simply title it Reimagine Nanaimo, which is highly appealing to me. And if someone under this section of the evening wishes to make that motion so that staff can proceed to get on with a very important process that will assist this city's recovery from COVID and ensure its future prosperity, I would be delighted if someone would make a motion to that effect. Councillor Thorpe, seconded by Councillor Martman. The motion is that the City Spark engagement strategy would now be entitled,
The City Spark rebranding.
yes, rebranding, would be now entitled Reimagine Nanaimo.
Call question.
I'm ramming through democracy tonight, Councillor Armstrong. That's not like you.
We talked about everything.
All those in favor? Oh, sorry, Councillor. Yes, Councillor Brown, pardon me, we still have you on. And then Councillor Armstrong, and then Councillor Bonner. You're off. It's just Councillor Bonner.
Then just to waste a little bit more time, because we could have been out of here before 9 had we voted for the thing before, is that I think that going further, that all introductions of items should be done in prose, as you so eloquently have done earlier, going forward with council meetings. So that was it.
Oh, thank you, thank you. All right, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. A motion for adjournment, I believe. I think that's covered everything off. Yes? Nothing else? Motion for adjournment. Moved Councillor Bonner, seconded Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Thank you very much to all council, to all staff who stayed through the evening. A fair bit of work accomplished today. Thank you.